And welcome to the Voice of EMS, put on by One EMS. I am Charles McFall, and here again, the lovely Lavern Hardwick.
Hi.
the nice wave. I like it. I am in the midst of moving studios, so I am not in my nice backgrounded area. I have a ton of junk behind me, but that is what it is, and it is okay. I just have to live with it. Laverne has a very beautiful, clean blue wall behind her, and she's better at this than I am sometimes. So you were on a couple weeks ago, and you and I have also talked previously, and you kind of tipped your toe, if you will, into the waters of talking about unions. And Georgia is a right to work state. I use air bunnies for that, but it's really, when we say that, most people say, no unions. I can do what I want, essentially. And I've grown up most of my life in Georgia and heard that unions are the devil, and it makes it us against them mentality, and it screws over management. So you didn't grow up in Georgia. This is your second home. You grew up in a unionized state of New York, and you were telling me a little bit about how you disagree. So I'm going to ask you, Laverne, are unions bad for EMS?
No, I don't think they would be. And the reason that I don't think they would be is because, especially for people that work in smaller towns where things are kind of run by one person, it's a one man band, one man show, they have no one to speak for them because it's what that one person says. Where a union gets in and there's a discrepancy or a dispute, they'll arbitrate that. They're the middleman, the mediator. They're the one that stands in the middle and listens to both sides. And they're there to defend the employee. The owner typically has the legal team, the HR department, and everyone else. But the worker has no one but himself. So that's who that union is. It's that voice that can speak loudly and can articulate what that person wants and needs to the management, to the human resources department, to the corporation, so that they could come to a happy medium.
All right. So why trying to figure out how to dive into this for everybody and for myself. On the surface, it does sound good. Why does it get a bad rap? If it's there to protect me and help me, I mean, don't I have to pay dues and take that out of my check? And don't I have to work when I'm told? And can I not get a day off when I don't want one?
Unions have nothing to do with your schedule. That's all the employer. So that's a myth. It doesn't take away the employer's right to scheduling. What it does force the employer to do is to do fair scheduling. For example, we all know that holdover rule that I'm actually having a problem finding in the state rules of EMS because I've been looking for it. And if you could point me to it, that'd be great. But that one rule where they tell you, well, we have the right to hold you over for 2 hours.
Right.
I've always been told that it's a state policy or SOEMS policy. I think it's a company policy or a locality policy where you live, because I haven't found it in the EMS rules for the state anywhere. And like I said, if you could find it, let me know where it is, and I'll stand corrected on that. But the union doesn't tell you when to work. But what they will tell you is, we've looked over your contract with the employer, and we feel like they're not treating you fairly in this area. They meet with people. They have boards and union members that go to meetings, and they discuss things like salary and benefits. And if the union and the people on the board, who are the members themselves, elected members themselves, tell the union that, no, I believe that we should be making a fair wage and we need like a 10% increase. Well, they'll then go into talks with the employers about that. And then that's where the mediation comes in, because obviously the employer is going to push back on it, and then the union is going to push forward, and they'll give them a deadline, and it all becomes a legal matter. And then they do things called walkout. And what a walkout is when the union wants something for not one person, but all of the employees. And the management team decides that they don't want to do it. And the union says, well, we're not budget on it. And then sometimes that does happen. In industries like the air, and I don't know if you remember back in the 80s where the air traffic controllers didn't get what they want.
Yes, yes, yes.
and they all walked out. But what happened with that, because they're federal, the president overrode all of that. He fired all of them. Now,
Mm,
on your regular local unions, that doesn't happen, but that's the federal thing, so that's totally different. When you're talking about state and localities, those rules are different.
gotcha.
What will usually happen if they threaten to walk out for several days or weeks, and when they threaten to walk out, that's when the management typically will come back to the table and say, "Hey, we can't do the 10%. Can we work with 8, or can we work with 5?" And that's where that negotiation goes in. They start to negotiate, and so sometimes the union will settle maybe for a lesser amount, but not nothing. They'll get you something when they do things like that. And those things they keep people in the industry. When you have a union or you have someone to speak up for you, they provide legal services depending on the union and the benefits. But where I'm from, the unions provide legal services. For example, if an employer attempts to terminate you, they will provide you legal representation because they must explain why they terminated you. What did you do? Um,
Do they not have to do that now if you go to the unemployment department and file a claim?
I'm sure they have to do it as far as unemployment. I'm not an expert on that, so I really can't speak to how the unemployment part works. I've never done that. But what I can say is there have been situations. I know people personally, from where I'm from, who, let's say they had a substance abuse issue and they were terminated from their job. Well, the union fought to get that person's job back under the promise that that person would go to rehab and check in and make sure they were doing what they needed to do because they're a good worker. They just happen to have some social problems. So
Okay.
things like that. Um, are benefits of being in a union. Also, certain unions, like in New York, the healthcare workers union, well, they also get benefits, additional healthcare benefits. Your benefits sometimes go through the union and not the employer pays into it, but the union pays into it as well. So you get better benefits because you're having two entities pay into your insurance as opposed to one. So now you're going to get more benefits from the insurance companies or from the doctors because you have more money going into it.
Gotcha. So here's some of the things I've been told is unions are for the working class only. As in, firefighter union, nurses union. But didn't you say that as a civilian in New York, you had a civilians union?
You got hospital workers union. They're civilians, but they work in hospitals. You've got the Teamsters union, and those are the ones that cover people that do heavy labor. You've got let me see who else can I think of as unionized. The sanitation people, all of the city employees, all New York City employees, municipal employees, they have some sort of union. The
Okay.
sanitation workers, teachers, have a union. Now, once you get to a certain level, like management, if you're in a management position, management, it's not for management, it is for the worker. Like everybody's heard of the AFL CIO or the Auto Workers Union. These are just your everyday people who, blue collar workers, and they need representation against the machine.
So that does kind of sound a little bit like an us versus them. Would you classify, because you've worked now both in New York and in the unions for a long
Uh-huh.
time, and now in
Mhm.
Georgia without unions for a long time, would you classify employers as the bad guy and unions have to be there to fight against them?
No, I don't classify employers as the bad guy, not at all. But some people need an extra level of protection, or everybody's not able to articulate what they feel or what's going on. So sometimes you need that. You need to have someone else to have a voice for you as a whole. For example, as a whole, EMS providers were grossly underpaid. There are agencies now that are starting to see that, and they're doing cost analyses, and they're making increases. But that's not happening everywhere. It's not across the board. A union, being a member of a union, it would be an across the board thing. So if, let's say, all of the agencies in region 5 were allowed to be part of the union, it wouldn't be ABC ambulance service getting a raise and John Smith ambulance service not getting a raise. It would be everybody in that region who's under that union would be getting that raise because they would all go into talks together. So it's not a us versus them. It's just sometimes the little man needs a bigger voice. We just want to go to work and do our jobs, and all the legalese and all of the the semantics that go into being into management and into administrative work. Well, your average person, nobody has time for that. You want to go to work and do your job, and you want to feel like you're protected, and that's what the union will do for you. That's what unions do for you, or it's supposed to do for you.
So, are there situations? Have you gone through situations where a union has protected somebody that didn't need protect or shouldn't have been protected? Right? They're kind of a bad employee. They were dragging down the business and the morale of people, but because they were in a union, now the coworkers and the managers are forced to stick with them.
I personally don't know of that, but it's
Okay.
kind of like our criminal justice system, right? So everybody's entitled to due process, and how many people get off on technicalities?
A lot.
So he might be a bad person. I might know he's a bad person, but has what that person done been documented? Has it been egregious? Has it been documented? Has it been followed? Have you followed the processes for this person to make sure that you are documenting everything that that person's done leading up to your attempt to terminate that person? And
You know,
oftentimes that doesn't happen.
you're right. That is something that even without a union, we prepare for with my companies is documentation should by in its nature, it should like your mug there. That's great. Uh,
Grumpy.
yeah. Uh, but documentation should show a path of growth. It can show a path of growth, but I'm going to be honest about it. In America, at least in Georgia, in my experience of documentation, it is your things are being documented so that you can be terminated without being able to fight it. And the reality is, and I did document with somebody after I coached and coached and coached and had written up some coaching on them and recorded some conversations openly with them as documentation. I sat down and wrote them up, right? Disciplinary documentation.
Oh,
And it's like, man, I can't. One, they said, I can't believe you wouldn't fix this after a year of me working with them, trying to get them to see the vision of the company and fit better and stop being a road bump and a sore spot in the company. They thought my company was still wrong and said that. So there was a mindset there. But the other thing they said, and then this is BS. Documentation is just to get me fired. I'm like, you can turn it around, but yeah, I'm going to document everything we talk about. So if you don't turn around, I'm going to then terminate you with cause, and you can't sue me. You come after me, and the it's an insurance. If people don't understand, unemployment is an insurance, right? So the company still has to pay you to be unemployed for a certain amount of time. It's
mhm.
not just a government handout. And so, yeah, I mean, that's where documentation. I mean, I'm saying I'm already doing that with or without a union. Um, so you're saying that a union just openly says you can't. In Georgia, it's fuzzy.
Uh-huh.
Okay, the right to work is fuzzy, and I say it
Uh-huh.
this way because I was told, well, you set precedences, and I say I was told because I don't know. I haven't done my full research. I haven't talked to labor experts in Georgia, the Department of
Right.
Labor experts, but theoretically, if I don't like your face today, Lavern, I can say, get out, you're fired. Now, you, of course, can file unemployment and I have to pay that. You might even file wrongful termination based on other actions I've had, and I might can fight it, I might can win, but it's going to cost me a fight. Or you might just go, screw you, Charles. I don't want to be where I'm not wanted. You're an asshole. And you might just walk away after I've terminated you and not fight. And
Mhm.
it does seem like that tends to be more of the case in Georgia. But the fuzziness is what I was taught by an employer, and I do believe in them, what they said. I just don't know if they know the full aspects of it. What I was taught was you set a precedent. So I have tattoos, I have an earring. So if you fire somebody for having tattoos, you set a precedent. Or you have to put out a very clear demarcation, which I've seen fire departments do of, oh, we've had people with uh, um, tattoos and they're grandfathered in, but they have to cover them up or whatever. And from this point forward, we will not hire people with tattoos. And you set precedents so that if you then say, well, I'm going to fire Charles for having an earring, but I'm not going to fire Bob for having an earring, that's where you open up the door for suits. But that really just sounds like lawsuit court material, not labor laws.
Right.
So
And,
unions help
uh,
smooth that out, is what you're saying?
yep, yep. What they'll do is they properly interpret the labor laws, and if you don't have your ducks in a row when you're trying to terminate someone, that's where all that comes in. It comes into play.
So that kind of sounds like. So is there a penalty? Like if I go to try to fire you, Lavern, in a union setting, and I don't have my ducks in a row, do I have to pay you a penalty, or you just get to keep working?
I think that's I'm not an expert on that. I can't really
Sure.
say. I don't know. If you but I do know of someone who when they did terminate them because the case took quite some time. When he won the case and got his job back because the union did take it to court, they had to pay him back pay
Sure.
because it was an unlawful termination. But I think that can be done even without having the protection of a union. I
Yeah,
think a
wrongful
person can do,
termination is the term I've heard. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, or harassment or something like that. And once it's
Right.
proven that the party is guilty, if that person has any loss of service or loss of time, lost wages, they may be
Yeah.
responsible for lost wages. But I'm not an attorney, so
Yeah. And we hear the horror stories. And this is a news
uh-huh,
story I read not that long ago about two police officers in LA who were playing Pokemon Go, which is another game thing that I cover with my social media. And that's a real world game on your phone where you go around finding the creatures
uh-huh.
and supposedly, allegedly, I guess is the word, they were accused of being on duty playing the game and refusing to go to a robbery in progress because they were catching something. You know how news stories are, you don't get the full details, but the way it played out is in the LAPD because of the unions or because of processes, we can say even that they stayed on desk duty or they were basically sent home or something for months while the
Administrative
investigation.
leave with
That's
pay.
it. That's the word. Yeah, and with pay. So they got
With pay.
paid for 8 to 10 months while everything was fought and figured out and argued. And then it was found that they were guilty. They didn't have to pay the money back,
No.
but the county, the citizens paid them to stay at home during this disciplinary leave.
Yeah.
And see, that's the problem I think people have with systems. They only look at it from their point of view. And your point of view is you just paid two guys. Well, I wouldn't call them bad people, but they made really bad decisions.
Right.
You paid two people to sit at home. I paid them if I'm a taxpayer, blah, 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 to sit at home. Hey, Tiffany Jordan, Pinnacle EMS is jumping in and watching this right now. And but you're looking at the union and you're going, you paid them to sit at home, but then if something happens and you're falsely accused, you would want to sit at home on pay. You'd be raging that you would be raging that you weren't getting paid. That how dare they take you down? And that's the thing. It's you can either, what do you think, Lavern? You can either bend towards punishing the quoting fingers wicked or helping the good who are falsely accused. And I would lean more towards helping the good, which also helps the people who are accurately accused.
Yeah. So that's the beautiful thing about America. It's two words called due process. There's you can't take any swift action until that person has been allowed to have their due process. So they had to investigate it. They had to investigate and prove that the gentlemen were or were not um, neglecting their job duties. And while we're trying to prove that, that burden shouldn't be on the individual. If the individual says that they're innocent till proven guilty, right? And
Right.
that's with anything. So if they say that they're not guilty of doing that, because if they say that they're not guilty of doing that, then they should be afforded the same rights as someone who's at work. I didn't do it, but you're saying that I did it. So you don't want me in your building, but I still have to earn a living. So right now, you're not firing me. You have to pay me because you haven't proven that I've done anything wrong. And then once it's proven, obviously that stops. And no, there's no subrogation or what do they call it, paying back the restitution or anything like that. They
Yeah.
don't do that. But is it unfair to the taxpayers? I mean, I guess I could see that side of it. But until that person is proven guilty, I mean, if you want to talk about fair and unfair to taxpayers, people that are proven guilty and get sent to jail cost you more for somebody to get sent to jail, because who pays for that person to have 3 meals a day, recreation, clothing, bed, food? Who
Yeah.
pays for that? So you end up paying more if someone goes to jail than if they on a little bit of administrative leave and then they get cut loose from the department.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I get that. Um, I think back to who else has educated me on labor and unions, and I realized I was in management at a company as a safety officer. So I didn't really think of myself as a manager because I had nobody underneath me. I was just there as a medic, making sure that things were safe. But I worked side by side with another guy who was an HR manager in training, and he had talked about how he came from UPS or somewhere, and they had a union, and he was teaching me, well, because us against them, and this and management can't get anything done. Then I realized now, as I look back on it, I realized he's in management, and it sounded very one-sided. Now I think back on what he was saying. Would you say that EMS, or not EMS, that's the industry? Would you say that unions in EMS balance it out? Does it help? Does it help management at all? Does it help the employer at all to have a union?
I'm sure there's some benefit to it. Could I attest to what the management benefit in EMS would be? You'd get a I do believe you'd get a workforce that would stick around a lot longer. If you think about today's climate, well, every agency that I know of is in competition um, for getting employees. So you would definitely, if people felt like they were treated right or treated better, and they had someone to speak up for them, they would stick around a little bit longer. If you had people negotiating your wages instead of people trying to get together and have one-on-ones with their supervisors, and the supervisors still tell them no. Well,
Right.
if you have a entity that's speaking for everyone collectively and bargaining and negotiating for that wage increase, I think that would keep people around a little bit longer. And then set increases. There are departments where people haven't had raises in years. Well, of course, if you got a decent union, they're not going to stand for that. There should be in the contracts that you sign that we get 3% every year
Right.
automatically. Above and beyond that would be based on your performance evaluation, but a standard 3% across the board is what everyone would get, or whatever that figure is. I'm just using three as an example. But everybody who's a member of the union who works in this capacity would get whatever the contractual agreement is. And all those things go into contracts and it's agreeable. If that employee violates those contracts, again, it's in the contract. So if employees violate the contracts, then employers sometimes come out on top with that. People do lose their jobs. And the union can't defend you when you're wrong, but they can defend you when you're wrongly accused. And how often does that happen? Or you just have a supervisor that just doesn't like you and he continues to harass you. And you
Right
go
there.
to HR and they do nothing about it. Well, you have a union you go to about it. Union goes to HR. And that's a whole different kind of conversation when a union goes to human resources as opposed to an employee. Because realistically, I believe that human resources departments are there to protect the company. They have the lawyers, they have the financing. They can defeat you uh, hand over fist because they're able to do that. Wherein the union goes to bat for you, and you pay a small union dues every month. But if you think about all the benefits that you're getting, um, you know, I
You
think, huh?
to work in the areas that you worked in, did you have to join the union, or was there an ability to work outside the union or alongside the union?
If and this, I'm going back to the 80s and the 90s, and if I remember correctly, everybody had to join the union. People that don't join the union are there are people that don't belong to certain unions, and those are people that come in and when the unions go on strike, and those are the people that will cross the picket lines and work when the members are striking. And
Right.
they call those scabs. Those are people that come into work when the union's on strike. You call them substitutes, but the
Sure.
name that's out there is called a scab. If I remember correctly, in the hospital, everybody was a part of the union. When you got your HR paperwork, you got your union paperwork as well. And you're part of the union. You just have to pay your dues. If some people choose not to pay their dues, so you're still a member of the union, but when it comes time to get defense, for you to be defended if something happens on the job, if you've not been paying the dues, then they can't defend you because you're not an active member of the union.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I get that. I get that. That actually makes some sense in today's world. Now, I know you're referencing 80s and 90s when you were in it, and even if even if you're in it up to 2000, it's hard to remember. That's 22 years ago. So lots of things change, and that I'd love to hear from somebody who's in unions now, a union rep for EMS in a state, something like that. I'd like to talk to you about that, because what you were just saying is a good perspective. Is I have worked in places where a supervisor just didn't like me and we would not get along. And I'm not saying it's their fault or my fault. I could have been a complete ass. I don't remember, but there was definitely those issues. There's issues with bosses not liking me. There was one time I turned in a resignation after a boss just screamed at me in front of people. And I screamed back because that's who I was. I was like, no, we could have gone in your office that's 5 feet that way, but you chose to sit here in the hallway. So I'm going to push right back. And he didn't fire me. And he probably would have just let it go had I let it go. But I was like, nope, I'm not going to tolerate that kind of behavior. It was where I was in life at the time. And I'm not saying I was right and he was wrong or anything like that. I was just, here's my resignation, 2 weeks notice. And I didn't expect this, but he accepted it immediately. I was like, okay, now I'm out of a job. Whereas, going to a union rep, perhaps, especially being a angry, heady 20-year-old paramedic, heady being all up in my head, thinking about things for those of you who don't understand that term. Maybe going to a union rep and having them go, that presumably is more seasoned and wizened and said, hey, kid, how about you keep your head down, your mouth shut, and enjoy your benefits, and here's where you can do better and work. Didn't have that. And he was well within his rights to accept the resignation immediately. I've now, as an employer, I've done it to an employee who broke the rules. They turned in the resignation and immediately broke the rules. I'm like, well, you're not coming back. And they were all shocked. I was like, yeah. How would, in your opinion, working in both situations in Georgia here and in New York in the unions, how do you feel like a union would benefit EMS and fire in Georgia?
Well, just kind of for all of the reasons that we mentioned previously and the things that they can do. One of the reasons that I believe that it would, let me just retract that. Let me just say it this way. It would take a long time for it to catch on because from the time I moved, not just Georgia, just in the South in general, there's been such a anti-union vibe.
Yes.
And it's vocalized, it's verbalized, it's outwardly spoken. You would have to get a buy-in for it because if if unions attempted to really aggressively target the South or target where we are, they would get so much pushback from the people because the people don't know the benefits. And then the people that are in power would say, it's all lies, it's propaganda, it's fake news, they would say all those things. So it'd be a hard sell. You remember the industrial revolution started it more north of us. And that's where people had to fight for their rights. They didn't have free labor. They had people who actually worked for a wage and wanted to be treated fairly. Where we know, well, not to get too much into that, but we know the history of the South and its labor processes for hundreds of years. So up in the North, it was an industrialized world. They had factories, they had plants. And you can go back and read historically where people of many different demographics fought for their rights and started to get them in the 1800s, 1900s, long before everything supposedly leveled off in this country. But that's a whole different podcast.
I'm looking up some stuff about unions in Georgia and in general. And there was something that popped up in the search. I'm trying to find it. It's talking about laying off. Okay, Georgia is a right to work state. That means it is illegal for an employer and a union to have a contract that requires employees who join the union or pay the dues to the union. So that's it. That's what right to work means is you don't have to join in Georgia. You don't have to join the union or pay the dues.
Right.
So we right to work works both ways, right? You know, I have a right to fire you. You have the right to quit. Is how I've been explaining it to some people that ask. Um, and I have always said, in my understanding, being us versus them with unions versus management, what I
Uh-huh.
said was a manager. If you listen to the people, they don't need a union, right? If you listen to them and you treat them as well as you can and you're honest about things, because a union, correct me if I'm wrong, Lavern, but a union won't force me to pay wages that I cannot afford. Like, if I have a bottom line, this is the money that's coming in, this is the business we're doing, and they said, well, we need to double the wages of all our union members. I guess if they can hold me hostage to that, then I could just say, well, then I have to have half the workforce has to work double the time. I don't know how that would work, but they can't just say, okay, well, you make, as a business, you make $1 million a year, but you got to pay out 1.5 million in benefits and stuff, because that math wouldn't work.
Yeah, I don't even want to speak to that because I'm not a legal expert nor a financial expert on that in that area of it. So I can't say, and I highly doubt that they would come in and say make force you to pay wages that will cause you to go bankrupt.
Right.
That would defeat the
And
whole purpose.
exactly. And I
Yeah,
think
I
that's
highly
kind of the
doubt
vibe
that.
I've gotten from people is like, oh, they'll ruin my business. They'll take everything. It's like, how does that even work? Because if there's no job to be had,
Hmm.
then there's nothing there. What little I do know about unions, besides learning from you today and from the few little people who weren't in them explaining them to me, was TV. But you see that, I think, set in the 80s and 90s. I watched a show called The Wire, and there it touched on some of that. It wasn't about unions; it's about drug stings and this other stuff. But some of the characters worked the docks, right?
Uh-huh.
And dock workers union, and there was, during a set period of time, there was very little work to be done,
Uh-huh.
and they're sitting at home complaining about how only 3 people got called up today. I held up 4. I don't know why, but only 4 people got called in today. And then the 50 other union workers don't have work today because that's all the work there was. And
Uh-huh.
that seems to me to be life. Is
Well,
just
here's
union doesn't mean you get paid.
yeah. Well, here's what I know to happen. Let's say there is a layoff and there's loss of work. The union is also responsible for helping you find another job.
Okay.
So, um, as a kid, my mom was in the union, the hospital workers union, a local 1199, and she still is a retired member, but nonetheless still a member of a union. And because it's a lifetime thing, once you retire, you're still in the union. So when I came of age and was looking for a job, because my mother worked for the union, they helped me find a job. So if there's loss of work, if there's layoff, you go down to the union. They have job boards. They have job placement. Um, they'll help you with that. They have educational assistance programs where if you want to go upskill yourself, you can do that through the union. They even had summer opportunities for the children of union members. So again, I'm speaking the 80s and 90s, so I don't know how it
Sure,
goes
sure.
now. But these are opportunities that they not only afforded you, but they afforded your family.
Nice. I mean, that is a benefit in itself.
Hmm.
You know, if I can get my kids to a summer camp or an EMS camp that gets them started with the basics of what we do in this field and let them learn in a fun way, that would be
Hmm.
interesting, for sure.
Hmm.
And yes, the argument can be made that take care of your own life, and I would make that argument personally. But I'm telling you, as an employer, there's lots of people who do not take care of their own life, and I think I see people getting taken advantage of. I'm gonna make this statement and see if you've heard it, because I definitely try to toe a line with asking you to make statements that might put you into any kind of jeopardy. Um, but I have talked directly, one to one, directly to employees of other companies that talk about, without naming names of the companies, that talk about how um, they're run ragged, right? And these are typically private companies, and they're there for a 10-hour shift, but then because of 12 or 14-hour shift, hey, you got to run this or don't come back tomorrow. Oh yeah, by the way, you get off at midnight, and now I need you back at 4 in the morning. And if you can't be here at 4 in the morning, then you don't have a job anymore. And scheduling, right? I've heard of companies put out schedules the day before each shift. So you get back or call the station or whatever, or however you get your schedule by 5 p.m. and you see now you're working tomorrow or now you're not, and that's these are stories that I do believe from the people who are telling them to me, and I've heard them in more than one company. And it does seem like a right to work means I can treat you however I want. And yeah, you can quit, but how many people are quitting? How many companies are going under? Not as many as you would think.
No, not as many are going under because for every row of people that bails out, there's another row coming in.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, my heart goes out to people that work in the private services because they work hard. They work very hard, and to have that kind of pressure and that kind of stress, I don't. Especially at this age, I couldn't handle that. Even back when I was younger, and I worked the private service, I dealt with it as much as I could. But when I got to a point where, yeah, nah, I'm not dealing with this anymore, I walked away from it.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I've never been at a point where the private service was my main source of income. It was always a part time for me, and I had options, but maybe not everyone has that option. It's terrible. The thing about you can have private, you have unions that come in and service the private services or the private sector, and that's a whole different dynamic. I've never worked under a union that dealt with the private sector, but that you can have that. You can certainly have that, but the employer would have to be willing to allow it because they would have to be an active participant in it. Like I said, it gets into benefits and all the and things like that and pay. So the employer would definitely have to be a part of it. Now, the smaller private services in our industry, I don't think that would be beneficial. Not at all. Not at all. Well, you're talking things like the larger municipalities and of such.
Hmm.
I think that would be beneficial. Now, your firefighters have unions. Your firefighters have the option of being in a union. They can choose to be in and choose to not be in it, but they do have a union. I hear a pretty good union as well. But specifically for EMS, yeah, we don't have anything like that.
Yeah, not
And
straight up in Georgia. At this
yeah, no.
time, I did find some stuff I'm going to talk about in a minute about there's some international ones or whatever that
Uh-huh.
are available.
Huh?
But something you mentioned about the municipalities reminded me of something you said a little bit earlier in this conversation, which was hiring processes and raises and this and that. And man, I remember back in the 2000s, I want to say maybe 90s, but I think it's the mid 2000s, where it made major Georgia state news that the city of Atlanta was having issues with their police and fire. Gwinnett County was having issues because the powers that be were refusing to do raises, and it had been, and that's when the news was coming. It had been, I'm making up the number because I don't remember the real number, but it had been like 5, 8, 10 years since the last raise, and this and another, and the budgets weren't there. And just in general, I can even talk about personal experience where I was in a small county. I think the county had 14,000 people in it, and we had 2 ambulances, and we were full-time service. I don't think there's any full-time firefighters. It's all volunteer firefighting there. And there was a police department, but there's a police department and a sheriff's department. So you had 2 different budgets for that. And we were trying to get new ambulances, and we were getting paid as medics like $10 an hour. And it was really low. And this wasn't that long ago. And I remember going to the council meetings, the city, not the city, the county meetings, and them going, well, there's no money in the budget. And we just read out our budget where we billed out $4 million for EMS that year that was brought in. And we had $1 million budget, which most of that went to payroll, even at $10 an hour at 24 hours, on duty plus overtime because we didn't have enough people. Most of that budget went to payroll that year, and we couldn't get approved for trucks. We couldn't get approved for anything. And I could see the benefits of a union coming in going, then you just don't have workers. And in reality, in my experience, I did not work for Gwinnett or the city of Atlanta. Those were just news stories I'd seen where the powers that be just didn't care at that time. And they were just like, no, we're not going to do it. And then eventually it did happen. APD got raises. Gwinnett Fire got raises. Don't know if they were good raises. I don't know how long they went before the next one either. But in my case, people would just leave the county that I was in. I ended up leaving the county I was in after that, going, no, you're so backwards to everything. You want me to go and save your life at 3 a.m. and make sure the lake is safe that I work near, but you don't want to pay me a livable wage to do it. and then you want to take away the equipment I do have. Um, but more people show up. And I don't understand how that works. And it hurts, in my opinion, it hurts the citizens of the county, the taxpayers, you know?
It
Uh,
does. It does. Without getting into the whole payroll thing, because you know how that could possibly be.
sure.
Um, the larger counties, it changes with the administration, and when administration changes, the changes are made. And I do believe that at the business level, the services themselves, they pitch a good effort to the politicians to get this done. And because they've been in the trenches, they do explain, hey, we need to get these people paid because milk's gone up, gas has gone up, all these things have gone up. So we need to make these people whole. We want them to come back to work. And it's unfortunate that sometimes people, not just the politicians, but just people in general, don't realize the value of what we do until they actually need us, until we show up
Yeah.
at their family member's house, or they come in and see some of the conditions of some of the stations, and they look around and they go like, this is what's happening. Yeah, this is what's happening. Oh my goodness. And now they've
Yeah.
seen it firsthand, or they've impacted by it, and then suddenly a change gets made. And so we can tell people until we're blue in the face, hey, without us. But it reminds me of a conversation that I had with my son not too long ago, when we were talking about like, it's in our industry, it's tough getting people. People are not staying. The longevity is not something that we're seeing in this with this newer generation. And his thing was, well, like this generation, they want their money instantly. They don't want to worry about a pension and retirement and that sort of thing. They want to get their money
Yeah.
now. I said, okay, well, if everyone in this generation had that mindset, you all want to get your money now. When you call 911 because your house is burning, because someone's breaking in, or because you fell and you can't get up and you've broken your leg, who's going to come get you? Because by the time y'all realize and all of you decide to not do these types of jobs, we'll all be retired. Who's going to come get you? There'll be a few in the generation that still want to serve, do the service and perform the service. But how long is it going to take them to get to you? So, you know,
Yeah.
that was one of those didn't think about it like that. I know you
I,
didn't.
I have struggled with getting my kids interested in anything future wise. Um, and I've tried, and to be honest, I have discouraged them away from EMS. I'm like, go nursing, go fire, go doctor, go something that's going to pay better or have a career. Because all along my career, after a few years in, I've been a loud proponent saying EMS in Georgia is not a career. You can get more training and you can get higher pay, but then you're still a high level technician with nowhere to go. So to do what you love to do, which is take care of people and help people, you have to leave and go be a nurse to stay in the field. Because otherwise you're going to go to a desk. You're going to maybe start your own company, which means you won't be running the calls anymore. A lot of us go into education to still be, I say this for myself, not for any other educator, but to still feel valued and give back to the industry that we love. But I'm still not helping a patient on a day-to-day basis, and I can only train so many people. And I just feel like EMS is not a career. How would you change that?
It's funny that you said that, because I was explaining this to a younger man yesterday. He's like, I know you make pretty good money. Why do you still work two jobs? Because I can't get in the classroom and preach anything that I can't still do.
I
So,
like it.
I mean, I have limitations to where I can't jump on and off a truck for 14 hours at a time, but I could still walk around a hospital floor and do um, a lot of the same things that I'm doing on the street. Yeah, no, I don't get to intubate and all that other good stuff, but I've done enough intubation in my life that if I don't do it again, I'm okay. And twice a year, I get to intubate a cadaver if I want to, so I'm all right with that. But I still get to provide a service in the emergency room, a continuum of care that that my colleagues on the street provide. Um, I just I don't know. It's I hate that it is that way. I hate that like at your level, my level, like I'm like the ceiling is here and I'm here, right?
Right?
I can't
Yes.
go anywhere. It's here for us. Um, so then you just have to. What I'm doing is I am taking some things from my past life, and then taking things from this life, and then I'm putting them together so that I can keep my relevance in this industry, yet keep my knowledge base from that industry and just make a legacy of my own. Um, yes, EMS, I believe, is one of the best segues into nursing school or medical school. I've got students that are doctors now. You know, it's nothing like having going to work one night and you hear somebody scream your name and you look up and you're like, oh my God, you're a doctor. God, I remember you didn't know what a stethoscope was, but I'm
Yeah.
old, you know, or you got a doctor following you around the ER all night, and the nurses are like, why is that doctor always with Lavern? There's a reason. Part of the reason that person's a doctor is because what I taught them when they were,
Yeah.
you know, a little, and that's the rewarding part because when you get to a certain age now, it's about what you give to other people who are now doing this. I don't have to get out there and prove my, um, what is it that we have? Our God complex.
Ah, yeah. The
Because
fear of God. Yeah.
yeah, because what you learn out there is that that is who you are not. We don't do death and dying, right? We just do the fix a flat in between. So I've
Yeah.
done my share. I've done my share. So now it's for these kids out here for me to impart on them, or at this level, what I do is I impart on their instructors what they should teach those guys, and we can keep this thing going and perhaps make it better. We could just make it better, and then
And,
encourage kids to go above, go beyond this.
yeah. And in case those listening and watching miss the point, she works two jobs to still be able to touch patients. You know, main
Yes.
job is an educator, second job is being in the ER. And that's the thing. And that's that. I don't know how to fix it. I can just see it. And I don't know that a union could fix that. It just it 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 just seems like as a career we're not taken seriously by the public, by the politicians, by the powers that be. And even somebody like myself, that I believe I still have grounded roots, you know, in the day-to-day of EMS. I'll be honest, I haven't been on a truck in 4 or 5 months now, and everyone, I don't want to be, and because I'm busy, I'm doing other things, and that's the harder part of it.
Yeah,
When I
it
first
is.
started doing digital media for EMS World, you're not EMS World, the conference, but the world of EMS, I guess I should say. I was
Yes.
very clear about, hey, no, I don't work a truck. So there's certain things I'm not going to really push and speak on. I need you to reach out to me and tell me how it is in the streets, because I'm disconnected from that now.
Yeah.
And it just seems like if you want to live and have a good life, that's what you have to do.
Yeah.
I'm looking at some other things that I wanted to talk about with a union real
Uh
quick. Is
huh. Excuse me.
in Georgia, what are an employer's rights and responsibilities with unions in Georgia? They can't stop you from joining a union. They can't stop you from participating, but they can't retaliate against an employee for engaging in union activities. And retaliation might mean firing, threatening, transferring, punishing, or laying off. And I wanted to talk about that mentality because obviously in Georgia, or at least in my company, I'll just speak straight from my company, we do not have a union. And if somebody gets hurt, they don't want to tell me about it. And we've had a few situations where people start saying, okay, I need you to know about this. And I start the workman's comp process of the investigation and the talking. And I make it clear every time, I want you to be safe. And every time it feels like, it's only been a small, tiny handful of times, every time it feels like they don't want to start the process, or they don't even want to tell me about it because they're afraid that I'm going to fire them. Because somewhere, somehow, it is a universal thing in EMS. From the old dogs like myself to the brand new kids that come right out of school into my company, somehow, some ways, beat into their heads that if you file workman's comp, there will be retaliation. The company will fire you. They will punish you. They will make you miserable. And I do not understand that mentality.
Obviously, there's some places that might do that.
Obviously, and I don't know the legalities of that. That doesn't seem legal to me, that if you went to all the heartache and the hardship of fighting it. And yeah, right now, without unions, what I'm seeing is, looking at this, reading this, that if that were to happen to me, if I were to get hurt, and God bless him, he wouldn't do this, but Brian Haney says, you know what, we just paid a couple, 80 grand to have surgery on your leg, don't come back. Then I would have to take him to court, and that would take a long time of me having no income, fighting it, trying to figure out how I'm going to get paid from all this, or why. And me personally, why would I fight to be somewhere that doesn't want me there, as long as my medical bills were paid? But it's a disruptive force that most people cannot afford to do, energy wise, time wise, emotionally, money, financially. And then I think it taints you in the field. Like, oh, you sued your employer for this, for a wrongful termination. Are you going to sue me because you think it's wrongful? And whether I win or not is not the point, is I have to go through that battle, and people just avoid it. It does feel like, and this is where I'm leading my question, if there were unions in EMS, we wouldn't have to worry about that. Both as an employer or as an employee, we would not have to worry as much about lawsuits, would we?
I can't say that. I can't speak to that because it seems like that would be plausible. It makes sense. But for that to be factual,
Sure, you're sure. Yeah.
yeah, I couldn't give you a definitive answer on that. But they try to avoid getting into the lawsuit part. That's why they act as the mediator to try to get fairness, to make things fair for the employee.
Because
That's
what
what they're
when I
trying to
was
do.
listening to you before, when I asked you about you're being investigated, wrongfully accused, whatever, they have to pay you a fee back for trying to fire you and not having their ducks in a row. What I'm mentally seeing in that, having the ducks in a row, is like, oh, I tried to fire Lavern and the union fought me, as they will, and I expect that. And oh, I didn't do my job and I didn't have everything lined up right to fire Lavern. Okay. Well, now you know I'm going to come for you. And so either you're going to get better, which I benefit from to avoid getting fired, or I'm going to get my ducks in a row, and 6 months later, whatever, I'm ready to fire you, and there's no argument.
Right.
You know,
And
it does seem like
it's
a safety net for both
yeah,
of us.
it should be, and it should be, and that's all. That's the biggest thing in being a proponent of unions in certain instances. Now, will it work everywhere? Absolutely not, because again, because Georgia is so um, defiant when it comes to certain types of unions. They and remember, EMS, we're such a new entity, right? We're new at this.
Yes.
When the firemen have been an industry, they're an industry. Firefighting is an industry that's age old. It goes back way back hundreds and hundreds of years, and we don't. So they figured it out a long time ago how to get that part done. When we're still, I think we're not in our infancy anymore, but I kind of think we are because we change things so much. We stay in an infantile toddler phase. We never grow up. And to me, EMS never really
Yes.
matures and grows up. It always stays in the toddler infancy. Like nursing is another one. Nursing, they started out a long time ago, um, but they worked their way up to become over hundreds of years a respected industry. If we don't ever move to the junior phase or the school age and then the junior middle phase, how are we going to ever grow as an industry? There's no, if you can take a nurse from Georgia and she can apply for, nowadays especially, she can apply for reciprocity to California. There's
Mhm.
certain criteria that she has to meet, but overall a nurse is a nurse, right? And then they can get reciprocity and go to that state and work. We got some states where there's no such thing as AEMT. We've
Right.
got some states where medics do this and they don't do that. In Georgia, we can do this. In California,
Yeah.
they can do that. There's no consistency other than CPR. There's no consistency amongst what we can do among our skill sets, and that's where we have to get it all together nationally. We have to come together nationally. I think that's the whole premise behind the national registry, but there are still states that are not national registry recognized.
Right.
So
And
how do we get it together?
even then, that's the baseline, right? So,
That's
and
still
you
part of the
mentioned
infancy stage.
exactly, and it almost, I would say, it almost feels like in a growth pattern. And I agree with you. In a behavior pattern, I'd say we're high school and we never graduate. Is we are moody. We want what we want. Some days are great, like the high school football team wins and we're all together. And some days it's clicks and we just fight each other and we backstab, and then tomorrow we hug it out. And we just never graduate high school and go on to be adults, where it feels like fire and nursing have at least gone on to college, if not on to a career right beyond that. And what you said about fire being hundreds of years old, it's been around definitely long enough that transplants easily move in and out, like yourself, where people come in from a unionized state or from somewhere else that does something more structured, and they come into, let's say, Georgia, and they go, holy crap, you don't have any protection here. You do this, you do that. That's crazy, man. And then, but they stick it out, or I'm guessing people have transplanted, stuck it out, become the chiefs, and instituted maybe not unions, but more stability and protection as they fought it out themselves and helped change everything.
Yeah.
It's a thing. We got some more stuff to talk about. We got to get out here. So I want to throw this out, what I found on the web. There's the International Association of EMTs and Paramedics. And it's a 10,000 member strong EMS union, which is not a very big union.
Not at all.
It is out there, and I'm not sure what they do, but you're welcome to look it up. And then there's this one that is EMS Workers United .org is the website. And I didn't even get to ask you about what a walkout affects. I don't even have much information here, but apparently there's another one. It doesn't seem like these are getting much traction, but these are two ones that I found on the web. I do want to ask that question, even if we're going to go along a little bit. You talked about walkouts. How does that affect EMS for the citizens when we have to have people running the 911 calls? How does a walkout / strike work in our field? Your microphone got muted. Something happened. All right, you got something happened with your microphone. You got to hit the unmute button. Maybe it's on StreamYard. I'm not sure. It won't let me undo it. There you go. Yes. So yeah, the strike. How's the strike work in EMS?
I don't know. I've never experienced that, and I can tell you how the strike works in hospitals.
Okay.
So in hospitals, this doesn't include the doctors and the nurses. They're not in the every other laborer in the unions. So what I remember from a hospital strike is you've got all of the ancillary people who are parts of the union, and they walk out. They come to work, but they're on the picket line. They don't go into the hospital. So when it gets to patient care, obviously the nurses are still there. They have to work harder. The doctors have to work harder because now you don't have the people cleaning and doing all of the other things that people would normally do in the hospital. They tend to jump on those negotiations a lot faster. And to get people, there are people that are not parts of the union. Like not every nurse, CNA or dietary person, or we call it EVS back then. We called it housekeeping. Not every person is part of the union, or if they work for a private hospital, they're not a part of that particular union that hospital is a part of. They'll come in, and as I said, remember I talked about scabs, or I talked about people who cross the picket lines. Yeah, who get, there's a thing. I don't know how the whole blackballing thing works, but those people that cross the picket lines, those are the ones that pick up the slack. When it comes to like emergency services stuff, like I said, those strikes don't last very long. I'm not sure. There are certain industries where striking is illegal, like the air traffic controllers. That was an illegal strike. Yeah. And because, excuse me, that's an industry where it's critical. It's a critical industry. But like, let's just say truck drivers went on strike. How would that affect us? How would that affect us overall?
Right. And it'd be detrimental to the economy as a whole.
Right. In New York City, they have different, like the transit workers union. When I was a kid, I remember the transit authority went on strike, and that means the buses and trains. So nobody could get it. New York City is all about the subway system and the bus system, about their transit system. Everybody rides the subway. The New York City subway system is the great economic equalizer, because you'll have a homeless person sitting right next to a multimillionaire on the subway in New York City. That's just how it works. Everybody takes a subway. And so when the subway workers go on strike, more people are forced to walk. They have to make accommodations in other ways. Again, that's another one of those. The transportation strikes are one of those, because that's the part of the infrastructure. The transportation strikes, they try to handle those very quickly, because think about how much income is lost if those entities shut down. So They will work harder and faster to get those up and running. How would that work in an EMS strike? I really don't know. I couldn't say, but I don't think it would be a good thing.
Because I agree, and that's where my only real fear comes in. As I imagine the fear of the communities that would hear us talking about that
Uh-huh.
is, but right now, I mean, you got it's a catch-22 in the argument. You're fearful. Oh, and they could walk out. We won't have any coverage. But right now we have limited coverage because everybody is understaffed, and your holdovers, right? Or even volunteers. There are people who will volunteer to do 48, 72, 90, whatever, 94 hours, whatever that is. I mean, they work too many hours. So now you're understaffed and you're exhausted in some cases, not all cases. Would a union help improve that? I can't say, but that's my
I can't
argument to
say.
balance the fear of strikes. But I'll tell you, I would have a very, very, very difficult strike. That's one of the bad things that was sold to me on unions is like, well, if they tell you to strike, you have to strike. I'm like, that's not right. I mean, in the young mindset that I
Yeah.
was, I didn't understand that. But now in EMS, I'm like, I don't know, man. I got in it to help people. And would I sacrifice what I want for myself to make sure that I do my job? Personally, I probably would to my own
Uh-huh.
detriment.
Uh-huh.
It's a tough place to be.
But a strike is not something that the union leaders wake up one day and say we're going to strike. That is a long thought out and calculated process. They don't just they don't just walk out arbitrarily or randomly. It has to be at a stalemate in order for them to do that. Like we want this and management says no, and they say we want this, and they negotiate and bargain back and forth, and management is still like no, then that's when the threat of a strike will happen. But they're given enough time and enough leeway to try to work with each other before that happens. That's an absolute last resort.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
all right. You to the positive of things. It's not that it was negative, but there was definitely some interesting discussion there. You are taking it upon yourself to do an EMS Educators Day coming up.
Yep.
Talk about that.
Oh, okay. So I got with my chief, and he said he agreed to it. And so what I'm putting together is a group of instructors from different areas to come in and do train the trainers for our EMS educators. Sometimes it's a little difficult to find educator hours unless you go down to the conferences, and not everybody's able to do that. So if
Yeah.
we could we've had a couple here recently. Not everybody was able to get to it, and there's still people that are lagging hours. So what I'm trying to do is put together a symposium so they can come get about 8 hours. Um, Knock that chunk out, have a lunch and learn session, and just learn a bunch of things from other instructors where we can share some best practices. I've got a couple of vendors that are going to set up some tables, and, so you can come see some of their wares. It's not a big thing like you'd find at a big EMS conference, but, they want you to come see some of their newest equipment. They'll come out and show that while we're there. We'll have lunch provided, a little coffee and continental breakfast kind of thing, but it's all about a learning day. We're going to touch some subjects like technology, teaching technology in the classroom or working with technology in the classroom and how to do that and set up your online forums. We have one guy doing how do we teach adults? That's different than teaching children. The Andrew, and I'm saying andragogical, I can never say that word. Andragogical learning, you're gonna, versus the pedagogical learning pieces. So he's going to talk about that. I have a master instructor who's going to teach the teachers how to teach students to take a test, because that's a big one.
That is a big.
Um, yeah, and she's going to teach test techniques, teaching how to teach your students test taking techniques. I said that right. And some pediatric assessment stuff on how to teach that, some airway stuff. I think I got a good mix of things, and hopefully it turns out to be an interesting affair to where we can do it more regularly here in the metro area. We're just waiting for just a few administrative things to take place so we can go ahead and get those course numbers. And we'll be sending out the announcements very shortly about that. I'm excited about it. We'll have opening to about 75 people to come down.
I'm excited too. It's going to be very, very cool. One EMS will be there and participating. And if somebody's interested in coming, how do they find out more? I know you said send out announcements, but how do they find out more about being able to attend as an instructor?
We'll have the notification sent out to the state office of EMS, and I am going to send out information to various agencies that I know what of, and then they can also reach me at send questions to our paramedic program email box. It's paramedicprog, P-R-A, I'm sorry, paramedic prog info, paramedic info at atlantaga.gov. And we
There you
can
go.
kind of get you some of the details. But I'm going to try to get those flyers out and get those posted out to the masses, and on hopefully I can get you to post that out for me and get
Oh
it
yeah.
out to your constituency, and then some other agencies, and have them pass that around so we can get some educators who need some hours come and have a little bit of fun, you know,
Yeah.
and get that going and get kind of start a tradition.
I'm excited. I like that if we can't get change on a big scale, we can make it happen on a small scale, and that'll grow.
One day
So
at a time. Yeah, we can
with
do it one
that,
day at a time.
all our social media is We Are One EMS. All my social media, I guess I should say, is We Are One EMS, and you can find videos and interviews over at oneems.com. And I'm getting more into the habit of getting all these things cut faster and produced. I've got 3 videos holding right now that I need to get posted, but that's why we do these live. They're on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, and they're there. And the hashtags We Are One EMS, because even with unions or no unions, at the end of the day, we all do the same job, and we are one EMS.
We are. We are. We definitely are.